What the question is, after 41 years, does he have any choice? Yeah. Yeah, staying in the parking lot or coming this way. Yeah. Yep. I'm sorry? 82, 83. Move forward? Okay. What? Good. So sorry. I guess the weather hasn't been working with me, and this coughing has been bothering a little bit, but hopefully we'll, we'll manage. Let's pray. Gracious and Heavenly Father, we are getting ready to begin. We want to thank you, Lord, for the good morning and the good worship service that you gave us. And now, Lord, that we're getting ready to study your word this afternoon. I pray in a special way that you also guide our thinking, our minds, allow us to enhance our understanding, and especially, Lord, that as we learn to work with your scriptures, that we would be able to then use it in a way that will be a blessing to other people. Bless us all here. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, so this afternoon, I'd like to take the time to walk you through the development of divine revelation throughout history. And how is it that we have come nowadays to where we have different points of view in our understanding of the scriptures? You ask a Protestant one way, you ask an evangelical, will go the other way. You ask a Catholic, will go a separate way. So how is it that we have gotten to that point, and how can we learn to see and then move in a better direction? So when we talk about divine revelation, we need to begin mentioning that in the very beginning, revelation was completely verbal in the very beginning. So let me use this board to illustrate it using that timeline. So you might remember some of those little things, and also Gabriel. In the very beginning, in the Garden of Eden, communication between God and man was face to face. Man was able to see God, talk to God, comprehend God. And even when God will say things, man was able to comprehend better. And everything was going well until we got to chapter 3. Then in chapter 3 of Genesis, now we see the serpent moving in and creating a distortion about God's character. And as a result, now we have sin coming in. So this face-to-face communication ended. However, even though man was not able to see God anymore, man was still able to hear, listen to God. And you'll see that communication in the Garden of Eden. God spoke to Adam, God spoke to Eve after sin. So there was that verbal communication. And it is there where God then established the plan of redemption. And this plan of redemption is very significant for us to understand. Why a plan of redemption? Why a plan of redemption? In order to understand that plan of redemption, we have to go back to Genesis chapter 2, 16 and 17. And in that text, we will find God instructing for the first time, at least that's the first recorded instruction that we read in Genesis 2, that man was able to eat from all the trees in the garden except for one, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's verse 16. But then comes verse 17. And in verse 17 is where man listened, but apparently things were not completely established or cleared. I don't know. Because in verse 17, God tells Adam, the day you eat from it, you will surely die. And if you want to translate that phrase literally from the Hebrew, then God was basically telling Adam, the day you eat from it, dying, you will die. So it's a repetition of the Hebrew verb to die, which then automatically will tell, number one, the immediacy, and secondly, the certainty that that will happen. Okay? So any disobedience will end in death. Okay? So now we have Genesis 3. And in Genesis 3, then we have the serpent coming in, and the way the serpent now camouflage things, number one, in her presentation, and this is obviously the devil using the means of the serpent, you will read in Genesis 3:1 that the serpent was the most cunning animal of all the animals that God had made in the garden. But what does cunning mean? Well, if we take it from our English, cunning is basically some sort of a wisdom, some sort of a knowledge that is being utilized in a negative way. Right? But when you try to understand what is the Hebrew verb or the Hebrew noun translated as cunning, you'll be surprised. Because the Hebrew verb or noun that is translated as cunning in verse 1, 3:1, is the word that means naked. The very same one that you find in Genesis 2, verse 25, that describes Adam and Eve as being naked in the garden, that's the same word that you will read in Genesis 3, verse 1. So, and that we find translated as cunning. Now, why that translation beats me, I don't know why it was translated that way. But the actual word is, the serpent was the most naked of all the animals that the Lord God had created. That should have been a better, more literal translation. And so what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, basically, when you see Adam and Eve described as being naked in Genesis 2:25, and now the serpent coming in and presented as naked, what is the serpent trying to accomplish? It's trying to present itself as one like the other. You're naked, I'm naked too. So hey, we got some similarities. And so the serpent utilized that to start then bringing in her ideas to the woman. So basically, the devil utilized temptation in the most subtle form, bringing in something that they already had or that they already were, okay? So that they will not be totally disturbed. And so now, that's how the serpent says, well, so God told you not to eat from any tree. Well, remember that God told Adam when he was naked not to eat from any tree. And so now here comes the conversation. Are you seeing the context? And with the context, now God's character is completely distorted. Adam and Eve ate from the tree. Did they die? You read Genesis 3, verses 6 and 7. What was the immediate result of eating from the tree? They didn't drop dead, but their eyes were opened. So they saw themselves naked. Now, the question is this. The question is this. God clearly told Adam and Eve, or actually, it was Adam, the day you eat from it, dying, you will die. So Adam was supposed to drop dead the minute that he ate from it. But he didn't. And so now, different Christian thinkers have then developed the idea that then what God really meant was that man was going to be, that was the starting of dying for man. That he was going to die physically eventually, that he was going to die morally, or different other things. But when you go back to Genesis 2:17, God didn't say you will start dying. God clearly said, the day you eat from it, and then we have the translation in English, you will surely, and that surely will indicate certainty. You'll drop dead. But the question is, why didn't they? Yes?
Are you saying just like how the snake, like you say he's naked, they found out that they were naked, so is the nakedness a bad thing?
Well, that's a good question. I like your thinking. In Genesis 2:25, nakedness is not negative. But when you come to Genesis 3:7, now nakedness becomes negative. It becomes a sign of separation from God, disobedience from God. And so this is why from there on in the scriptures, God is always wanting their people to be covered with his righteousness. And he doesn't want us to be naked. I'm sorry? Yeah. Okay. And so basically, God wants, part of the restoration is to bring us back into that correct relationship with God. So now, why is it that Adam and Eve didn't die? The answer is found in Genesis 3:21. That's where we have the answer. Genesis 3:21. Remember, Adam and Eve had made for themselves aprons out of leaves. And now, in verse 21, God comes around and God basically removes the leafy aprons and he covers them with skin aprons. Does that answer why Adam didn't die? So that means then that someone took their place. Somebody died in their place because Adam was supposed to die at that moment. And so it is from that moment on that God's revelation will focus on presenting this sacrifice. What is this sacrifice for? What is this sacrifice for? And so this is where we need to also try to understand it a little bit more. Because many people see the sacrifice and it's just, oh, he forgave our sins. But in reality, why was the sacrifice there? For sin forgiveness? No. It's so that they wouldn't die. Are you following? So now, not dying will give them the opportunity to be forgiven later. Are you following? So that's what started out the whole divine revelation in the very beginning. This revelation was verbal or was oral. From the time of Genesis all the way to the Exodus. It was verbal or oral revelation. God spoke to Noah, God spoke to Abraham, God spoke to Isaac. It was all verbal communication. All communication. What happens here? And now we have to look at between Genesis 3:21 and the Exodus, we're looking at about possibly 3,000 years. Okay? Could be a little more, give it or take. But it was a good chunk of time that everything was verbal. God will communicate to the head of the household, and the head of the household will communicate to the household, and then the next head of the household, so on and so forth. Okay? But then what happens at the Exodus? What happens? Now we read in Exodus 15 that the children of Israel who came out of Egypt, and it's in Exodus 15, so let me read at least the chapter. It's a small chapter, so you should be able to find it there. In Exodus 15, you will find that there is a number given to those who came out of Egypt. It was 600,000 males, not counting females and children. Okay? So how many total came out from Egypt? 600 males, not counting females and children. And obviously, when you talk about children, for the Hebrew, the age of counting started out at the age of 21. So anyone under 21 will be counted as the children. And so how many came out? We don't know. We don't know. I have just made a personal calculation. You're free to take it or leave it. Okay? Feel free. And I just, for the sake of illustrating this, okay, I just went with the ideal American family. You got mom, you got dad, you got bro, and you got sis, right? 4. And so, if every family that came out of Egypt were composed of 4 members, and it was 600 males, and you do a little mathematical multiplication, then it'll bring you up to about 2.4, 2.5 million people. It could be a lot more than that, okay? I'm just using a number for the sake of illustrating something.
That would be males over the age of 20, right?
Correct, 21.
21.
Correct, exactly. So now, that means then that instead of communicating to the head of the household, God will have to be communicating to how many thousands and thousands heads of households. And so that communication at one point may begin to get distorted. So it is here where now God starts out a new modality of communication. And in Exodus 17, 14, in Exodus 17, 14, God instructed Moses for the very first time. God instructed Moses, put it down in writing. Write it down. That is your very first reference. Hello, hermana. That is your very first, excuse me, your very first reference to writing something down. So now, from here on, the whole revelation of God was written. Did that stop the verbal communication or the oral communication? No. Oral continue. And throughout the Old Testament, we're going to have written and we're going to have oral communication. Okay? And so God spoke to individuals without putting things in writing. Like Elijah, for example, he never wrote anything, yet God spoke to him. But then we got some others who wrote materials. And so now, this was the process throughout the Old Testament. Okay? This is God's transmission throughout the Old Testament. You have sanctuary, you have feasts, and you have different other types of rituals and activities, but they were even written. You have Leviticus, for example, where you have a bunch of these rituals and these services and things like that. So that was Old Testament. Now, notice this. Notice this. The devil, seeing that revelation, will not stand still. Okay? He will somehow try to interject so that the revelation will be either stopped, distorted, changed, whatever. Now, when you read the Old Testament, the devil attacked beliefs and practices. Read Genesis 6 with the antediluvian generation, beliefs and practices. Read the story of the patriarchs, the story of Israel. The devil managed to get them into move away from the belief into then something else so that their practices will be different. But you also notice another thing. Each time the scriptures, the revelation will be read to the people will come back. There will be a revival. You can read it in different places. Nehemiah chapter 8 is one of those examples. There is a revival when the scriptures are written. So the devil tried several times, but several times the Lord will bring his scriptures, will be read, and the people will come back. The devil even attempted to mix apples and oranges concerning the faith of Israel. Okay? Even at that point, one of those examples that we see here in the Old Testament is the case of Baal. Have you read about Baal and Baalism in the Old Testament? How was Baal brought into Israel, into the faith and to the worship of Israel? How was it? Well, the devil managed to get King Ahab to marry a priestess. She was the daughter of a pagan priest. And so she brought Baal into perspective. And some people will think that Israel abandoned God for Baal and that Israel paganized completely, when in reality, Israel did not paganize. What happened? You can read it in 1 Kings chapter 18. When Elijah is at Mount Carmel. And remember that on Mount Carmel, we have the showdown between the prophet of God and the prophets of Baal. And then you have King Ahab. And then you have some of the leaders of Israel there. And then in chapter 18, what is it that Elijah tells the children of Israel? Before he gets into telling the prophets of Baal, you are the most, you go first. Before doing that, you'll remember reading that Elijah gathered the children of Israel around him. And what is it that he told them? Until when you will be limping. If God is Lord, follow him. If Baal, go after him. Remember reading that? What does that tell you? Had Israel abandoned completely God? Or abandoned completely Yahweh? No. They were going from one side to the other, limping, okay? One side to the other. So they were playing with the two. And apparently they felt comfortable. But why? What was going on? What was going on here is that the devil managed to mix apples and oranges without creating much disturbance. Why? Notice this. Here we have Yahweh. Okay? And then here we have Baal. Now, how were the children of Israel able to create a syncretistic faith, merging the two and creating a third new faith with the two mixed. Okay? Well, very simple. When you read the scriptures, Yahweh is Lord, right? The name Bel means Lord. You'll be surprised that sometimes in the Old Testament, God, our God, is called Bel. Because the word Bel means Lord. Not only Adonai, but the word Bel means Lord. So what's wrong? One is Lord, the other one is Lord. What's the problem? But then in addition to that, Yahweh requires sacrifices. Right? What about Bel?
Sacrifices too.
So now we have some sacrifices here too. So now this guy is Lord, this one is Lord. He wants sacrifices, this one is sacrifices. So if I go here, what's wrong? If I go here, what's the problem? I get the same message. Right? Apparently. Now what else? The Lord required blood. Right? Sacrifice without blood is useless. Remember the story of Cain? Blood is important. What about Bel? Did Bel require blood? Why do you suppose that they were cutting themselves? So yes. So now when you see those similarities, and you see two Hebrews there, wondering which church should I go this Sabbath, what will be? Well, they can go anywhere because they're the same, right? But now, where is the difference? So far, we have seen similarities between the two. Where is the difference? And this will only someone who was well versed in his Bible will know it. An individual who will not take time to read his Bible, or who will be just listening to whoever, whatever, will not be able to get it. So, what will make the difference between Yahweh and Bel? Well, he's God, and this guy, and he's God too, so what's the problem? I'm sorry? Yes, but he's Lord. And to him was attributed the power from the sun to give life to vegetation and different other things. This is where the difference comes in. And again, only someone who knows his Bible well enough will be able to detect it. The difference is the source of the blood. That's where the difference lies. What's the source of the blood in the case of Yahweh? What's the source?
Lamb or a bull.
God was the one providing the blood for the restoration of man, which was illustrated through the animal sacrifice. But the ultimate, it was God the one giving his blood, not man. What about Bel? So here, God provides the blood, and here it is the human. providing the blood. Then we are able to know the distinction, and then I'll say, I won't go to church this Sabbath, I'll go to this one here. Are you following? So, and this is how the devil managed to get some of those Israelites confused. Still believing in God, but confused and going in different directions. Okay? And I don't know about you, but this can also teach us a lesson, present time. We need to be careful when we try to associate two different practices, thinking that both are okay. We have to analyze it before we get into something like that. Okay? So that's what we have. And this is why Elijah came here, and then he built the altar. And then the sacrifice. And that's when fire came down. Because only what God offers is what is valid. Nothing else. Okay? So we have that example. So now, in Old Testament times, like I said, the devil attacked the beliefs, the practices. But he noticed that he was not going anywhere. Because each time the revelation will be read, Israel will come back. So now, what is it that he does? We will find that the last book of the Old Testament is Malachi. That's the last book of the Old Testament. And Malachi wrote about 425 BC. So, when is the new revelation appearing? Who is the next prophet after Malachi? So now the next prophet is John the Baptist. And his grand appearance was in AD 27. You see the time? You see the gap? About 400 years. This period is known as the intertestamental period. In other words, is the time between the two testaments. Also known as the time of the great divine silence. God did not speak to the people. There's no prophet during that time. No revelation, nothing. So did God abandon Israel? No. Why not? They had all of this Old Testament experience and writings. They didn't need any more. But now, the devil, all this time, tried to deviate them, but couldn't, because God will bring them back. So his efforts were basically futile. Didn't work. And now, by Malachi, he already knows when the Messiah is appearing. How does he know? We got Daniel. Exactly. We got Daniel, and we have the 70 weeks prophecy. Okay? And the angel explains to Daniel that the Messiah will be arriving sometime towards the end of the 70 weeks. Notice that the 70 weeks are not about the birth of Jesus. Some people have confused that, thinking that Daniel talks about the birth of Jesus. Daniel does not talk about the birth of Jesus. Daniel talks about the beginning of Jesus' ministry, because he takes us all the way to John the Baptist. And Jesus is already born, and he's got, according to Luke, he's got already about 30 years of age. Okay? So now, coming to Malachi, he knows he's got very little time. What he couldn't get in the previous 4,000 years, he only have 400 years to get it. The whole attempt of the devil was to prevent the Messiah to come, to be born. If he's not born, then no redemption. Are you following? Okay. So, in Old Testament times, what method of interpretation did God use for biblical prophecy or divine prophecy? Which method of interpretation? Okay. He will use historicist. Now, I need a little help. Is that with a C or is that with an S? Historicist. It says C? Okay. I apologized. Okay. How do I know that God utilized the historicist method of interpretation? How do I know that? Very simple. All right. Okay. I need to go back and see how prophecies were explained in Old Testament times, right? And so one of the first ones, remember Pharaoh's dreams? And then Joseph coming in to interpret the dreams. How did Joseph interpret Pharaoh's dreams? Which were, by the way, given in symbolic format, okay? Cows and wheat and things like that. How were they interpreted? The dream. So then Joseph talks about 7 years of plentiful, 7 years of famine. He interpreted them in a historical format. Did it happen that way?
Oh, yes.
Yes. So it was historical, the way Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. Okay? Another example, then we go to Daniel. Okay, we can, kind of jump and go to Daniel. So how did Daniel interpret the big image to the king? And how did Daniel interpret the second dream of the lion and the bear and the leopard and the undescribable beast? Was it interpreted allegorically? No. So now Daniel is saying, "Oh, king, you're the first, but after you, then this kingdom and this kingdom and this kingdom." And then later in his book, especially chapter 8, he interprets. One is Medo and Persia, the other one is Greece. So then that will help us see that the biblical interpretation was historicist. Okay? Hold on to this, because now when we move into the New Testament, we need to find out if this is the same methodology that Jesus and the apostles followed, or if they changed and they went in a different direction. Okay? So now, meanwhile, let us focus a little bit in that intertestamental period. Most Bible readers, and you correct me if you think I'm exaggerating, and maybe I am, I don't know. You will tell me. But I think most Bible readers, lay people, pastors, scholars, do not know or do not understand what transpired between Malachi and John the Baptist. Many people think that between them, there was only a few years in between. Because the Bible doesn't talk about that time. Malachi doesn't say, oh, by the way, there will be 400. Malachi doesn't say that. And Matthew doesn't say, oh, by the way, remember the 400 previous years? They don't say that. So it's time that apparently or it seemingly disappear in time in the minds of some, okay? Without realizing that lack of understanding of this period then creates a complete misunderstanding of what goes on in the New Testament. And will then help us understand why Jesus has so many clashes, so many conflicts with the religious leaders. And why is it that Jesus will from time to time say, so how do you read? What does the Bible says? Have you read this? Why is Jesus continually taking them back to the scriptures? Okay? So now, Daniel talks about Babylon, Media and Persia, Greece, Rome, and then Papal Rome, etc. Now, by the time of Malachi, which empire is already history? By the time of Malachi, Babel is past. It's history. By the time of Malachi, who's the master of the world? Okay, so now we have the Medes and the Persians as masters of the world by the time the Old Testament is closing. Okay? Then, Daniel told us that after Media and Persia, who will follow? Then we have Greece, right? And then after that, Rome. Now, this is where you need to learn how to read and interpret history. It's not just historical facts for the sake of facts. Nothing happens in the void. Nothing happens by chance. There is always a result of an intervention, whether that is on the part of God or that is on the part of the devil. Because remember, when you read the scriptures, whether that is Old Testament, whether that is New Testament, when you read the scriptures, you have to read it in light of the great controversy. If you not read it in light of the great controversy, you're going to miss a lot of points. Because the devil is coming in, and God is also coming in to undo the devil's works. Okay? So now, when you see that, the Medes and Persians are spoken about, and they're recognized in the Old Testament because that was their time. The Romans, that's when the New Testament opens up, right? And so they are mentioned, which is the only empire that Daniel told us about, but is not recognized or is not addressed, is not discussed in the scriptures. Greece. It almost seems like Greece is in the hiding. And when things are in the hiding, those are the things that the devil can utilize the best. Because you're not even aware of that. Are you following? Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I have asked in different other places. So, think before you answer. Which of these four kingdoms, including Babylon, Medes and Persia, Greece, Rome, which of those four was the most dangerous of all? Rome and the Pax Romana. Rome. You all agree? It was Rome? It was Rome? Okay. That's what I thought you will answer me. Because that's been the same question, that's been the same answer I have received. Yeah. But that was not the most dangerous kingdom. It was the Greeks. It was the Greeks. Remember, imperceptibly appears, not mentioned Old Testament, not mentioned New Testament, nobody knows about them, yet the Greek influence still felt today. It's still felt today. Okay? What happened? How was this possible? And now, this is where the devil is coming in. Okay? This is where the devil is coming in. Remember, how much time does the devil have before the arrival of Jesus? He just got about 400 years. In 4,000, he couldn't get anything, so he's got only 400. So it is all or nothing at that moment. Okay? So now, what is it that he does? He brings in the Greek Empire into perspective. Actually, if you read the story of how Alexander managed to defeat the Persians, only a mighty hand could have allowed it. Because all the time, Alexander was outnumbered.
Correct.
All the time, he was outnumbered. And somehow, he managed to defeat them. Okay? But also at the same time, think of this. If you pictured in your mind an imaginary map of the Mediterranean world, okay? Picture that map in your minds. You'll see the Greek peninsula. Rome is a little before, right? You got the Greek peninsula. After the Greek peninsula, then you have this little isthmus here where Istanbul eventually was built. Then after that, you have what became known as Asia Minor. Okay? And then eastward, that's when you have Persia, and you have Babylon, you have Assyria. Now, how much stretch of land you'll have between Greece, eventual Istanbul, and then Asia Minor, And then later, Persia. If you see the map, it's a huge, it's vast piece of land. And so Alexander engaged the Persians, and in 3 particular battles that were decisive battles, he beat them. But then for him, and then at the end of every battle, you know that there will always be casualties, right? There is no way you will fight without casualties. And so will Alexander be going back to Greece for new recruits and then come back again? That's going to take a lot of time because of the land that is in between. And as Alexander continued moving eastward, even worse. So what is it that Alexander did? Which no other king or kingdom had done before.
He adopted their religious practices and incorporated them.
He basically imposed Hellenism on the conquered peoples. What is Hellenism? The word Hellenos means Greek. Describes an individual born in Greece. So Hellenism describes the way of life of the Greeks. Are you following? So now, what is it that Alexander imposed then? If you are to define Hellenism, Hellenism is the imposition of the Greek culture, Greek lifestyle, Greek way of thinking, Greek religion, and Greek language. Can that help you understand why? Written by Jewish people in Greek, not in Hebrew. Why is it that the New Testament is in Greek, not in Hebrew? What language did Jesus speak to the people? Many people think that it was Aramaic, only because they read in Mark that Jesus utilized 3-4 phrases, Aramaic phrases. But Jesus spoke Greek to the people. He evangelized in Greek. And that will help you explain why Jesus speaking to the centurion, who is a Roman, he is a Jew, and there is no translator in between. Jesus talks to Pilate, same thing, Roman and Jew, and there is no interpreter in between. Which language did they use? They used the common device at the moment, and that was Greek. Greek actually displayed Aramaic as the lingua franca. Aramaic was the lingua franca until about the 300s BC. With the imposition of Hellenism, now Aramaic takes a step back, and now Greek comes in. And then knowing Greek, then you'll be able to move around. Pretty much, if you know English nowadays, you can go just about anywhere, right? So English is our lingua franca today. So it was Greece back in those days, or Greek. Okay? So now, what happens with this? What happens? With the introduction of Hellenism, which is unspoken in either one of the two testaments, with the introduction of Hellenism, now the newer generations of Jews, they, excuse me, born and grown in the land, now they have to go to school, and they have to learn, and they have to speak So TV, Facebook, internet, and all of that stuff was in Greek. So then, what would happen? So these new generations of Jews will grow up speaking Greek and not understanding much of Hebrew. Pretty much what happens in America nowadays. First generation come to America, they speak the language, they bring their culture, so on and so forth. But when the second generation or the third generation grows up in America, what happens? They are now Americanized. So for them, English and everything about America is what they feel more comfortable with, because this is the environment in which they are growing and living. And so that's what was happening back in those days. Are you understanding? What was the result of this? What was the result of this? The result now is that in this intertestamental period, an issue developed. Which, by the way, you're welcome to Google it, you're welcome to AI. It's all there. So I'm not telling you anything that will not be available to you, okay? So what happens? The older generation have the Hebrew scriptures. The younger generation are not understanding, are not following. So now there is a need for translating the scriptures. And I see the devil moving in that direction. Why? Because whenever you translate from one language to another, you will soon find out that never two languages are equivalent one to the other. There will always be some deficiencies that somehow you will try to cover or provide for in the translation, but you may still fall short. Okay? So now what happens is that the scriptures, for the first time ever, are translated into a different language. And this is called, that's the Septuagint. That's the abbreviation. If you happen to read a book and you find those three letters, that is a reference to the Septuagint. And that means that traditionally, it is believed that 70 elders were commanded to translate the scriptures into Greek. And so this is the translation of the 70s. So now, when you read the Septuagint, you compare the Old Testament Hebrew, you're going to see a little bit of differences. Okay? That was unavoidable. And so now the younger generations are just happy. We finally got a Bible that is really akin to us, and we can read it, and we can relate to it, and all that stuff. And that only lasted for one generation. Until then, the King James Bible is no longer meaningful, and so now you need the new International Version, or you need the RSV, or New Revised Standard, or you need the New English Bible. Why? Because now you need Bibles that can now be a little more clear and more up-to-date according to the times, right? So now, how to explain the Septuagint? Then, first, commentary ever of the Old Testament. That first commentary is called Mishnah. This is happening all during this time, and is not being accounted for in the Bible. Okay? Even New Testament writers don't talk about Septuagint. They quote the Bible, but they don't talk about Septuagint. So now they got the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is the first commentary of the Bible. But it's not a commentary of the Hebrew Bible. It is a commentary of the Septuagint Bible. And then by this time, those commentators were being influenced by the Greek way of thinking. So even the commentary had a little Greek or Hellenistic twist in it. Okay? So now those are excited about it. Oh, now we are able to understand it. Until a new generation comes up. And now, this Mishnah is not really cutting it for them. So now we have another commentary coming up. And I'm sure you heard of this name. Does that sound familiar? Talmud. So the Talmud is the commentary of the Septuagint of the Hebrew Bible. You see all the levels in the process? What is it that we're creating? For the first time, remember, throughout the Old Testament, he attacked beliefs and practices to no success. So he knew he needed to change his strategy. So now, knowing that he has only 400 years for the arrival of the Messiah, now he messes up with the divine revelation. Before it was only beliefs and practices. Now he's attacking directly God's revelation. And that's the first one that we see there. Okay? And then with that, there was another body of literature that was developed also that is known as pseudepigrapha or apocrypha. Have you heard those words? Okay, so these were not the only literature. There was more literature. And so as a result, instead of interpreting the scriptures and interpreting Bible prophecy historically, now they utilized allegory.
We have Ellen White.
Yeah, but she comes later, much later. So it's now allegorical. So by the time Jesus arrives, can you understand why the Jews rejected Jesus? Why the Jews were fighting with Jesus? Because this Hellenistic thing basically messed up their minds, their understanding, to the point that now Jewish people who didn't have a problem in Old Testament times, the previous generations didn't have any problem. Now this generation has issues understanding God. And now they have different ideas about God. They basically misinterpreted the concept of the Messiah. They could not understand the Messiah anymore. The idea of sacrifices, those were also distorted. The priest even had a business in the temple, because they saw it more from a business perspective than a spiritual perspective. And then what can we say about the Sabbath? The Sabbath was also completely distorted. So the truth or the revelation of God was basically distorted. That's how we got the Sadducees. That's how eventually we got the Pharisees. Yes, ma'am. Scribes. Yeah. Yes, sir. How was the canon established? The Old Testament was the easiest because all the Old Testament books were already available here. And this is why the translation. They were available, and so they were able to translate it. So selecting the Old Testament was not a problem because that was there. Now, the question came with the establishment of the New Testament. Because in addition to the Gospels and the letters, now we also have non-biblical or extra-biblical literature. And so why this one and why not this other one? And so the criteria that was followed, or that was mainly followed, was if the author is an eyewitness of Jesus, he has some fellowship with Jesus or with the main eyewitnesses of Jesus, then that literature will be kosher, will be acceptable. But if the individual had no connection to Jesus or to any of the apostles of Jesus, then that will not be acceptable. And so this is how the books were basically gathered. Who decided? That's a good question. The New Testament canon was not completed until about the 4th century AD, about the 300s. Before that, there were individuals like Origen of Alexandria and a few others who created their own list of books. But it was by the time of the Nicene Council that the necessity of putting together a New Testament canon came about, and so it was around that time that was decided. And it was decided by the leaders of the church at that time. Okay, we got the picture so far? So now, that will help us explain the cross of Jesus. The Jews could not understand Jesus. And so they rejected him, basically. And the devil was jumping up and down. Got him, got him, got him. But, you know, God can use whatever to get his purpose across. Whether that is a negative action, whether that is a negative individual, he can get anything and anybody to accomplish his purpose. And so while the devil was bringing in Greek as the new language to somehow get this misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the Old Testament scriptures, God also utilized the Greek language for a better purpose. And that is that now the Greek language have two tenses, or has a feature we don't have in English. In English, we have present and we have future. And then we have a normal past, right? The Greeks will have present, future, past, but the past tense is subdivided in 4 different types of past events. So, the 4 tenses, if anybody's interested, you'll have the imperfect, you'll have first aorist, you'll have second aorist. All of these are different past tenses, describing different types of activities. You got the perfect. All 4 describe past activities. But there is a nuance behind each one of them. The imperfect is the tense that talks about an event in the past that is ongoing, has no beginning. We don't know when it began. We don't know when it ended. That tense describes just a past ongoing action without beginning and without end. What would that tense be used for? Who? God who? To describe the nature of Jesus. The Bible writers, whenever they want to talk about Jesus' divinity and Jesus' eternity, they utilize the imperfect tense. Why? To tell me Jesus is ongoing in the past. He has no beginning. He has no end. And so what the devil intended it to be negative, now God is coming around and he's using it for our benefit. Now, what about this perfect? What about that perfect? That perfect tense describes a completed action. Imperfect means incomplete. This one means complete. So it describes an activity that happened in the past, okay? It has beginning, it has end, so that's why it's completed. We know when it began, we know when it ended. But one thing we do not have in English is that this past event continues to the present time. Meaning, the effects of that past action still bear effects in the present time. Now, what is the perfect used for? What is it good for? To describe Jesus' sacrifice. You will find that in the New Testament, most passages about Jesus' sacrifice are given in the perfect tense. Why? It's a past event? Yeah, 2,000 years ago, about. But are we still affected by that sacrifice? Present time? 2,000 years later? Yes. So what the devil intended it to be completely negative, now God is turning it around to help us understand more the nature and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So far, so good? Are you following?
How can you recognize the tenses in like the Greek? It won't just say the tense, would it?
No, you have to. My best way to help you recognize it is extending you an invitation to take my Greek class. It's only 3 semesters, but I promise I'll get you well lined up. Yeah, it'll take. It's not just 1 or 2 things. Yeah, and this is only. This is only 1 word that describes all of this. In English, we will have to use 3, 4 words in order to be able to describe that. Same thing with imperfect. They use only 1 word. We will need 2, 3 to describe it.
Well, if I said I went to church, how does that mean?
That past event, you went to church, you were blessed. Now, today, you're still being blessed. So the effects of that past event yesterday or last week are still bearing positive effects. Or you were baptized a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, past event. But today, 3 weeks or months later, you're still being blessed by your baptism. So that's kind of the essence of it. Okay? Now, let me move into the New Testament because I need to take you to present time. I've been going a little slow, but I want you to see how God has been working, okay? And how the devil has been trying to counteract, to prevent that we all see and understand what God has done. So we come to the time of Jesus and the time of the apostles. And this is 100 AD, and this is John, the last of the apostles. So now we have Gospels, Acts, and then letters. And those Gospels, those letters, including Acts of the Apostles, are an attempt to bring that newly established church into a more resonance with the Old Testament. So this is why you will see lots of quotations from the Old Testament. But it's not quotations taken from Talmud or Mishnah, things like that, but it's actual going back to the scriptures. Okay? Bypassing this period, because this one obviously affected the people. So now, how is Jesus interpreting prophecy? Is Jesus allegorical in his Bible interpretation or prophetic interpretation? Or how is Jesus? Is Jesus a historicist? And how do I know he's a historicist? Okay. Yes, but how do I see it in the New Testament? If I'm giving a Bible study to a Protestant or evangelical, and I'm telling him Jesus was historicist, really, 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 show me. How can I show that?
Because he mentions the Old Testament. He used the Old Testament as his scripture, and he referred to Jonah, he referred to Daniel, he referred to a lot of the different prophets in the Old Testament.
Okay.
And talked about
Okay, good, good. Sister?
From Emmaus.
I'm sorry?
Jesus walked to Emmaus.
Yeah, he was interpreting them, interpreting to them how the Messiah was to suffer and die and rise again. Okay, sister? Okay.
I know another reason. He kept mentioning, my time is not yet fulfilled. But when he was baptized, he mentioned that the time is fulfilled. So many times he referred to time being either fulfilled or unfulfilled.
Here's one of your best evidences you can have to show people that Jesus was historicist. Matthew 24. When you read Matthew 24, Jesus is describing events. And those events are having historical fulfillment. Then what about Paul? Was Paul historicist? Second Thessalonians 2 could be an evidence that he was also historicist. So the historical or historicist method of interpretation of the Old Testament was revived by Jesus, the apostles, and the early Christian church. Exciting. But unfortunately, it did not stop there. Let me open maybe a couple of questions for this graph, because now I need to make a new graph that will take us from John to our time. Questions? Yes? I'm sorry, let me come this way. No, the devil was utilizing, the devil was the medium, or the devil was using the serpent as a medium. And he was basically controlling the animal. But the reason why I bring up the idea of nakedness on the part of the serpent is so that we can see that when the devil wants to deceive, he's not going to present everything so bad and ugly and wrong to you, because you can pick it up right away and you will not follow it. So he will always mix apples and oranges and will make the error to be seemingly good. And people will think, oh, what's wrong with that? It doesn't seem like it's bad. But in reality, the devil is using it. And so that's one way of God telling us, be careful what you read, be careful what you see, and how you use that. Because not everything will be kosher, even though it may look like it. Okay? Okay. Yes, please.
Just quick, do you consider the Gemara not necessarily separate?
The what, I'm sorry?
The Gemara.
The Gemara. Yeah. Actually, the Gemara is separate from the Talmud and the Mishnah. It involved more the other body of literature that was developed during this time, that the Jews, in their effort to somehow feel that God is somehow communicating with them, they develop a whole new body of literature. Nowadays, it's called Apocrypha or pseudepigrapha, and that is all united or put together under the word Gemara. Okay, perfect. May I erase? Okay. So don't lose sight of this allegorical and historicist.
While he's erasing, if you want to stretch, saints, little, 2-minute break, doctor?
Yeah, that's fine.
A little 3-minute break, just
I've been stretching all along, so. Yep. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay. So now we ended John the Apostle, 100 AD 100. Okay? And so that's basically the close of the New Testament canon. One thing that perhaps I could have mentioned to you is that the time between the establishment of the church, AD 34, and we have AD 70, and then AD 100. Understanding those two periods will also help us get a better perspective concerning the New Testament compositions. So the Christian church, between Jesus' resurrection and ascension to heaven, and then the first martyr, Stephen, until AD 70, then the church makeup is mainly Jewish. It's a Jewish church. Some Gentiles, yes, but the bulk of the church was Jewish. What happened in AD 70? We have the destruction of Jerusalem, and we had the destruction of the temple, and with it, which might have been perceived as a calamity back in those days, in reality became a blessing and a curse, if you allow me to add a little more. Why it became a blessing? Because now the church spreads from Palestine. They move down south to Egypt. They move up north to Asia Minor. They go across the Mediterranean to Greece and to Rome, and they're spreading the gospel. I mean, they're talking about Jesus. And so now the church becomes Gentile, or more Gentile. What's the difference? And why it's good to recognize those two elements? Most New Testament, 3 Gospels, most letters were done before AD 70. And because the church was mainly Jewish, so the issues that the Christian church was having to deal with were circumcision, rituals, and other elements, the feast and some other elements. Why? Because the makeup of the church was mainly Jewish. And when they got baptized, they accepted Jesus, but then all of a sudden, Jesus was not good enough because you still have to be circumcised. You still have to do this, and you still have to do the other. So it's like Jesus was not good enough. They were bringing in additional elements. Okay? Now, with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, now the church is dispersed. Not only the Jewish people, but the church is also dispersed. Okay? And they go across the Mediterranean world, preaching the gospel. And then new people coming in, and they were mainly Gentiles. And since now the church is mainly Gentile in makeup, now the issues are different. are no longer circumcision or rituals or feasts or some other things that are Jewish. Now, the issues are mainly philosophical, specifically Gnosticism. That was the main philosophical undercurrent affecting Christian thinking around that time. Okay? And so, because of this philosophical undercurrent Gnosticism, now the church developed a new idea. The premise of Gnosticism still is, because you still find Gnostic individuals in the present time, the premise of Gnosticism was the body is evil, no good, it's matter, the mind. That's what's good. This was your thing to take care of. Okay? And so that automatically did two things to the Christian church. Number one thing that they did was that they distorted the nature of Jesus. Why? Because if it is true that the body is evil, then this Jesus who was born on earth and who came as a human, was he truly human? Was he truly human? So the Christians will question that. Because in their minds, how can God use evil body? If you present Jesus as God, how can he use evil body? So if you present Jesus as human to justify the evil body, then could Jesus save? Because he was human, he was not God. Are you following the issue? And so that developed what is known as the Christological heresies of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, 4th centuries over here. Okay? That whole discussion about the nature of Jesus. Who's behind it? Great controversy. Don't forget, okay? The devil is working behind the curtains. Okay? But so that was only one. The other issue that this Gnostic idea brought in was that then, if the body is evil and the only good thing is the mind, then let's party, let's drink, let's enjoy life. Who cares what you do in the body? After all, the body is evil. You just got to think about God in your mind, and you should be okay. Are you following? Yeah. The problems that we're developing? And for those who still were scandalized, no, we're not going to party, we're not going to dine and wine, or things like this, then they went the other extreme. If this body is evil, then let's suppress it. Let's punish it. And let's bring it into subjection. And so this developed the idea of individuals wanting to get closer to God by punishing the body. Are you following? That's what this Gnostic belief brought in to the church. So now the church is disturbed. The only apostle left. All the other apostles died before AD 70. Or by AD 70. The only one left beyond AD 70 was John. John the Apostle. And then it is to John that God now reveals, and that's the last revelation that we have. He provides the book of Revelation. He provides the gospel, and then the 3 letters. And that is all done in the last decade of the 1st century. And that is God's last attempt to bring the church back into divine revelation. So apparently, it had a good effect. But once John died, and now we are beyond apostolic time, now by the 200s, we have two gentlemen, both from Alexandria, down in Egypt. Okay. One, his name, Clement of Alexandria. He decided, and by the way, Clement is not of Jewish upbringing. He's more Greek, Gentile upbringing. So this Clement decided he was going to write a Christian commentary on the scriptures, utilizing Hellenistic terminology and Hellenistic ideas. You know what that means? So now the devil is one more time attacking not practices and beliefs, attacking the scriptures. Okay? Some people may say, praise God, he died before completing his work. But guess what? His pupil, Origen of Alexandria, picked up the baton. He finished up his commentary. And now we have the Christian allegorical way of interpretation. During the intertestamental period, we have the Jewish allegorical system. Now, here, we have the Christian allegorical system. So, some similarities, some differences between the two. John, we still use history. Excuse me. We still use history to present his visions. These two guys decided that philosophy, Hellenism, was better for interpretation of the scriptures. And so that was the method of interpretation in the Christian church until the 1500s. You know what happened in the 1500s, right? Now we have Protestant Reformation. We got Luther, we got Calvin, and some of these other great reformers. Huss. Well, Huss is a little before Luther and Calvin. And Protestant reformers were very clear in their understanding of the scriptures, to the point that Luther, Calvin, and some of the other reformers saw the beast of Revelation 13 and saw the little horn of Daniel, and they pointed it to the papacy. And so the Antichrist is the papacy. And so they brought back again the historicist. And somehow, if you read Great Controversy and some of the books, you will find that basically Catholicism lost a lot of ground to Protestant Reformation. Okay? And so the allegorical way of interpretation did not disappear. They still have it today. Did not disappear. but lost good ground to the historicist way of the Protestant reformers. When Luther was claiming the Bible and only the Bible, so help me God, and things like that. And so the sola scriptura phrase, and so emphasis on the scriptures. So now, with the loss of ground of the allegorical way, now in the late 1500s, we have two Spaniard monks. One, Luis Rivera, very late 1500s, and the other one, early 1600s. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's not Luis Rivera, it's Francisco Rivera. Francisco Rivera. And then the other one is Luis de Alcázar is the other one, okay? They're Spaniards, okay? And so Francisco Rivera picked up biblical prophecy and decided prophecy is not about present time, it's not about past time, prophecy is future. So now we have the development of the futuristic or futurism school of interpretation. So moving forward to the future, Luis de Alcázar, a few years later, wrote his commentary on Revelation, and then he says, no, I don't see too much futurism here. Most prophecy is fulfilled in the time of the writer. So he goes back to the past, and so now we have the preterist school of interpretation. So one is moving to the future, the other one moving back to the past. Why? And who's behind it?
The great controversy.
We got now the great controversy at play. The Protestants are saying we're historicists, and the papacy is the fulfillment. Rivera is saying, no, it's not the papacy. It's in the future. And this guy is saying, no, it's not the papacy. It's in the past. So this was the devil's way of moving people's attention from Rome into different ways and different eras for different interpretations. So that's what we have. So now, up to the 1500s, we only had one Christian entity or one Christian movement. That was Catholicism. So all this time, we're just working with Catholicism. Now, in the 1500s, with the arousal of Protestantism, so now we have Catholicism that continue, and then we have added Protestantism. So for the first time, the church is now divided. Before, it was only one, Catholic, universal, worldwide. Now it's subdivided. And Protestantism was even further subdivided into different religious groups, Presbyterians and Anglicans and all of those others. Okay? So now we have two. We come to the 1700s. Getting closer to our time, right? We come to the 1700s. What happened around that time? Well, this is the time, if you have taken a course on Western civilization, you will remember that this was the time of the Enlightenment. Have you heard that word? And the Enlightenment was a period that was characterized by discoveries and inventions and now new ways of writing and searching and analyzing different documents. And so they did that to ancient documents from the Greek philosophers, from the Roman historians, and so on and so forth. They did that, and now they decided to apply it to the scriptures. Now, who's doing that? Is the question. Okay? Who's doing that? These are the Protestant scholars. And obviously, yes, Satan is behind the whole thing. So now, Protestant scholars decided, just as we've been able to understand Roman and Greek and some of these other documents, now let's apply the same principles to the scriptures, because after all, they're just as ancient, right? So then, that's when the Protestants develop what is known as biblical criticism. They develop biblical criticism. These were not Catholics. These were Protestants. The very same ones who were claiming over here the Bible and only the Bible and that good stuff, okay? Come 1700s, and now they develop biblical criticism. What is biblical criticism? It's a science that analyzes the scripture from two perspectives. They call it lower, and they call it higher criticism. Lower criticism is about checking. Why is it that in this manuscript, John wrote this word this way, and in this other manuscript, it appears a little different? Why is it that this word skips here, but is given here? And so they work with those editorial things. And obviously, when you do that, you claim that those manuscripts are divine revelation given by God, but then you see some little problems, minor but little problems. Then what does that do to the value of the scriptures? It begins to undermine it, right? So that's lower criticism. That's not too bad. The worst of all was higher criticism. Because now higher criticism was about who wrote this. Was this Moses? Or was this John? And so now, challenges. Was this inspired? Was this not inspired? And then looking at why is this story here and not here? And so now, basically, it's not just simple editorial corrections, but now it is more content and authorship. And so when you are given a Bible that you yourself have a question on who wrote it, and it's telling you, read it because this is good. Who wrote it? Who knows? And I don't know, it's got some problems here and some problems. would you feel comfortable reading a book like this? And so between those two, now the scriptures was questioned, was undermined. And so now Protestants developed the idea that the Bible is not the only source about God. You can learn about God from books of history, books of philosophy, and other sources. You don't have to depend on the Bible. Can you understand why Ellen White says that if the church would have stayed with the scriptures, my writings would have not been necessary? Now, can you understand why she's saying that? My writings are the lesser light to bring you to the greater light. Why does she make those statements? Which some Adventists have not been able to really comprehend. Oh, yeah, they're still going on. Correct. So now, the Protestant church has basically abandoned the inspiration or the value of the scriptures. They still have the Bible. They still read it, okay? So don't get me wrong, okay? They still have it. They still read it. They still preach from it. But they have some other views, okay? So now comes 1840s. So now we have, and the church is having to deal with these three ways or schools of interpretation. So the devil has been successful at messing up with the scriptures. Okay? So then in the 1840s, so now what do we have? So now the Lord, seeing that the Protestant Reformation started out good, but did not complete the work, stopped, and now they just entertain themselves in their own ideas. So now we have the Advent movement. We have the Advent movement. And now we have Ellen White bringing us back to the scriptures and the power of the scriptures. The Bible is central, not somebody else's thinkings, so on and so forth. But then, when the Advent movement is gaining momentum, especially in North America, what happens? Now we have the late 1880s, 90s. We still have Protestantism. We still have Catholicism. And then Protestantism branches out. Now we have evangelicals.
Where the Mormons and because it's interesting how God raised up the Advent movement, and the devil brings in the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, cause confusion, and they sometimes confuse us with them.
And actually, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons are around the 1840s, 1850s, around that time, as a way of confusing people with the Advent movement.
Because those are a cult, and they try to lump us in together.
Correct. That's the devil's attempt to somehow discredit us. But now, he raises up another movement, the evangelical movement. And evangelicals branch out from Protestantism because they called Protestants very liberal in their view of the Bible. And so they wanted to hold on to the Bible. And so they claimed to be more biblical, and so they branched out. And so that's how we have Assemblies of God, we have Pentecostals, we have Church of God, and it's all of those groups. Those are evangelicals. And then we still have Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, so that they can also be confused with the Advent movement. So this is now the devil trying to somehow create a bigger cloud to make more difficult for his people to carry forward the mission and proclaim the message. And that's what we have until we come to the 1950s. No, not yet. Desmond Ford is a little later. It's 1970s. That's when Desmond Ford comes in. But in the 1950s, now we have a new development within evangelicalism, which we still have today. And that is the development of those city churches, if you want to call them that way, okay, which are the non-denominational churches. The huge 10,000, 20,000, but they're only themselves, okay, only themselves. And with this new development, now we have a new way of reading the scriptures. And so we have the idealist school of interpretation. So, historicist, futurist, preterist, idealist, that's what we have today. And the idealist is the type of interpretation that basically spiritualizes biblical ideas. So it's not about spiritism or anything like that. It just simply spiritualizes in the sense that it's talking about Revelation 13, the beast of Revelation 13, and you want to know what the beast of Revelation 13 is? Well, basically, if you're going through a divorce, that is your beast. If you just lost your job, that is your beast. And if you just lost your son, or your son is having this many problems, that is your beast. So that's their way of spiritualizing biblical prophecy, biblical content. Okay? Everything else is about that personal application that you need to deal with. So nowadays, for futuristics, we have the evangelicals. For preterists, we have Catholics and Protestants. For idealists, we have evangelicals, but are more the non-denominational churches. The only ones holding on to the historicist post is us. We're the only ones. But even within us, we're beginning to see some movements or some ideas moving in different directions.
Scientology had advertisement last week on major TV.
Presenting their ideas, their things. Yeah. So the whole thing about prophecy nowadays is developing a climate that is making it more unpopular for people to want to read Daniel want to read Revelation. And if people read Daniel or read Revelation, they will use different methods in order for them to get where they want to get, but not necessarily get where the Lord wants them to be. And so then different interpretations have been developed. And that's where now, having this historical glimpse, we can now learn how to use the scriptures, how to work with the Bible. What are some of those principles that we can use to make the Bible come alive and give us more light? That will be in the future time. Pastor, you still want to do Q&A? Okay, ma'am. Yes. I'm sorry? Yeah, we can do up until 5. And yeah, in case anybody has an appointment, a commitment, or something, don't feel like you have to stay.
That are tied to the presentation of Bible prophecy.
Okay, please.
Where do you place in that board the Messianic Jews?
Messianic Jews? That's a good question. Messianic Jews is a development that gained momentum, or has been gaining momentum, beyond the 1950s. However, the Messianic Jews, their idea of interpretation, which I haven't really gotten too much into it. Yeah. They accept Jesus. That's why Messianic. But they have some different ideas about Jesus and different ways of approaching Jesus, which in the second coming, which I don't know exactly how to go about. Those who claim that we got to go by the name Yeshua, and it's got to be that Yeshua name. What's the problem with the name? Call him Jesus, call him Joshua. What's the problem? It's only Hebrew, Greek. So what's the big deal about the name? So I cannot give you a clear answer about them, because honestly, I haven't done much study about Messianic Jews, but I can tell you one thing. Jewish people nowadays, and people get confused about it out there, people think that because they're Jews, that they know their Bible and they can interpret it correctly. And that is very far from the truth. They are the least interpreters of the Bible. And they will be the last, if at all, I will go and ask. Why? It's not about hatred or rejection or anything. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's more about their platform where they develop their ideas. Jewish people come from the Hellenic, they're thinking still from the Hellenistic intertestamental period. They kept going with the same ideas through the time of Jesus up until the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. With the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the Sadducees disappeared. And the Sanhedrin also basically didn't disappear exactly, but basically it was, they lost power, influence, they lost a lot. The only ones left after the destruction were the Pharisees. And these are the ones who have carried the baton throughout these years. So the same allegorical Hellenistic ideas of the time of Jesus is what they have been bringing all along. And so when you talk to a Messianic Jew, or even a Jew, not Messianic, just a regular Jew, that's what they're going to be operating from. They have this Hellenistic platform from which they attempt to understand and interpret the scriptures. And so they're very off. They're very off. So Jewish people don't have it made. They are the least who have it made. Yeah, and yet they're called Messianics. So that's part of the problem. Yes, please.
What's your understanding of the Nicolaitans? I know that's going way back to the time of John.
Yeah, Nicolaitans only appear in Revelation chapter 2 and then chapter 3. I think those are the only two places. The Nicolaitans were a Christian branch that came up from Gnosticism. So the name Nicolaitans comes or is derived from the Greek verb nikao, which means I overcome. That's the meaning of the verb, I overcome. So they claim to be overcomers. But these individuals lived in Asia Minor, around the area of Ephesus and the area of the Revelation churches. And so coming from a Gentile perspective, these individuals were influenced by Gnosticism. And so they were bringing into the church the idea of evil body, good mind. And therefore, if it's evil, the body, whatever, the mind, keep it good. And so this is why you read in Revelation 2 that the Ephesian church hated them. But then, I think it's the Thyatira church, or the Pergamon, I'm not sure exactly which, one of those two, Pergamon or Thyatira, now invited them into the church. And now they are accepted. And so that brought automatically into the church the development of corruptive practices. Since the body is evil, it doesn't matter what you do in the body, as long as you keep your mind cool and close to God, it doesn't matter what you do here. And so then it didn't take very long to the church to start now developing other practices that nowadays we would call corruption. We will be scandalized, but this is where that come from. Okay? Yes? Yeah, he was in the 1845. You don't mention that. No, I didn't mention it, but I could. I didn't mention it because I was more focusing on the development of these schools of interpretation that has affected the way people nowadays read and interpret the Bible. But obviously, in 1845, that's when Charles Darwin wrote his Origin of the Species, and then basically officialized the concept of evolution that came in. But evolution was more of a scientific perspective that rejected Bible, rejected faith. And so, so science, evolution, is antagonistic to the Bible and to religious things. And so that's why I didn't bring it up, because the focus was more on what's affecting us today. Yes? Okay.